one of my favorite topics, and that is open standards, right? And we see open standards as so much more than a document, right? Open standards are really the conduits that enable the interoperability of the open ecosystem. And to do that well, we need collaboration across industries. And that's what our panel is about. And our panel will be moderated by the Executive Director of the Metaverse Standards Forum and the Managing Director of the Khronos Group, Emily Stearns. Let's welcome our panelists on stage.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our panel on Pragmatic Approach to Open Standards. My name is Emily Stearns. As Patrick mentioned, I'm the Managing Director for Khronos Group and the Executive Director for the Metaverse Standards Forum. I have been working in standards for over 20 years now and managing a variety of different organizations. And I'm probably a little biased when I say that open standards are the unsung heroes of modern technology. So it's because of those open standards that everything we've seen here today has been made possible. And of course, they don't just appear magically. So what we're going to be talking about today is what it takes to actually not only develop, but also implement standards in the real world. And so I've got an awesome lineup of panelists with me. So as far as format, we will be giving 2-minute introductions, talking about what standards help shape in your work and how standards drive your work. And then we'll go directly into questions. And this is really meant to be an interactive session, so please raise your hand. There's folks with microphones around the room who will be delivering those. If you have any questions, you want to share your challenges or stories, we really would love to hear from you. And so getting started, let's have Scott with the Open Geospatial Consortium.
Great, thanks Emily. Thanks everyone for attending this afternoon. My name is Scott Simmons with the Open Geospatial Consortium, better known as the OGC. And if you want to know what standards do in my life, you just look at my title and that covers it, and I can be done with an intro. I look after the standardization activities in OGC, meaning that I help coordinate our 400 plus members' activities, all of their intellectual effort going together to develop these standards, and I just help make sure that all that works pretty well. And Emily had asked me the other day about what got me into this whole standards thing to begin with. And it's the same thing I want from all of you in the room, right? I want you to join the same reason I did. Years ago, I was working on a problem where we had to deliver vector data, geospatial feature data, and we needed to put some integrity information along with that data to deliver it. We had to ensure that it wasn't being stolen and manipulated, et cetera. I said, well, I gotta do something that my defense customer is going to like, get involved in some standards body they do, because someone's probably figured this out. So I went over to the Open Geospatial Consortium and said, hey, I see you're working on some digital rights management stuff. Might that work for me? Is there some way we can integrate this into our own processes? I don't want to reinvent this stuff. And one of the folks there told me, said, we've got 400 or so organizations, all brilliant researchers. They're doing all the groundwork. You just take what they do and use it for free. And I was sold, and I've been hooked ever since. And 15 years later, I joined the staff, and I won't ever leave.
That's awesome.
Thanks, Emily.
Yep, and next we've got Neil Trevett, who wears many different hats with Metaverse Standards Forum, Khronos Group, and NVIDIA.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. So my day job's at NVIDIA. I work at Khronos, president there, and the Metaverse Standards Forum. And I got hooked early too. I got hooked working with SGI to launch the kind of the granddaddy of 3D APIs. That was OpenGL. And that was in 1992. don't do the math. And but I saw firsthand the power of the collaborative effort, and just the power of open standards just to move the industry forward in a very positive way for everyone. And I too was hooked early and irrevocably. So since 2000, I've been honored to serve as the president of the Khronos Group. And you may know us for standards such as OpenGL that brought 3D onto mobile, WebGL that brought 3D onto the web, the new generation Vulkan 3D API, which is bringing 3D everywhere, OpenXR, which with the help of AR is bringing 3D into the real world. And of course, most relevant probably for this audience is GLTF, which is a standard that's feeding all of those 3D APIs. And then most recently, working with Emily, we helped bootstrap the Metaverse Standards Forum, which is bringing together dozens of standards organizations to collaborate to build the hundreds of standards that we're going to need to build the metaverse. But the more trendy way to say the metaverse, it's the combination of AI, spatial computing, and the web. And we're working on pre and post standardization activities to really push that initiative forward.
Yep, thank you. And David.
Hi, good afternoon. So David Rees, I'm the Senior Director of Ground Combat Modeling Simulation at Maxar. Truth in lending, I didn't grow up as a geospatial person. I come from heavy systems integration, weapon systems, aviation, large modeling and simulation solutions. And in the early 90s as well, I was in my office in Farnborough, in the UK. Did I lose my mic? And my boss came in and said, congratulations, you've got to figure out how to tie a whole bunch of simulators together. There's something going on in America, go and see what it was all about. And found myself in the middle, thank you. Found myself in the, is it on? Check, oh yeah. And then found myself on an airplane going to Washington to have a conversation with our American colleagues about how do we connect simulators together. That became the Distributed Interactive Simulation Protocol. As I went through the rest of my career, I've dealt with standards in command and control systems, in hardware, in flight management systems. So I really didn't realize until I was invited to come on this panel just how much standards and open standards have been a part of my career. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. It'll be interesting.
All right, and then we have Amy Rose.
Hi, I'm Amy Rose. I'm with Overture Maps Foundation. Overture was just recently launched a couple of years ago, in late 2022, and it's part of the Linux Foundation. And we do things that are a little bit different from what you're typically thinking in terms of open standards, but we were formed to build global, open, interoperable data. And so, as you can imagine, a big part of data comes down to standards. And when we talk about things at Overture, what we talk about a lot is the data. It's the most tangible, the most visible thing that we do. But it's really only one part of what we do. And we talk about data a lot because, who doesn't like to talk about data? But the big point is interoperability. And the only path to interoperability is standards. Interoperability is one word, but it's very deep, very wide. And when it comes down to it, the only way you can accomplish true interoperability is to base it on standards. So that's something that we think quite a bit about, certainly in terms of data exchange and data formats, but also just how you can start to bring data together. So building open data, building any data really, but truly with open data, it's one thing to build the data sets, but it's another thing to build data in a way where you're purposely building in interoperability, meaning that you're thinking about the design of what you're doing so that that data can easily connect with other data sets, that you can enrich data by connecting them together or use it as a reference to other data. And so that's a really big, important part of what we do. And early on, I'll kind of share a story about our first foray into what I would consider standards. And it's a really good story about why they matter and how you kind of get involved in standards. And in 2022, we had to pick a format. Like, how are we going to release data? What format is it going to be in? And anybody who's worked in any kind of spatial data formats, especially vector data, knows it could be anything. And what we wanted to do is enable the data that we release to be easy to use, obviously interoperable, And not just for people that were already kind of spatial practitioners, but for any developer, whether they had experience with spatial data or not. And so we wanted something that was open, something that was efficient, and that would work with modern cloud-native environments. And so we came down to GeoParquet, which at the time had barely existed as a draft specification as part of, as an extension to Apache. And it was a really interesting decision. We got a lot of really wonderful feedback on that choice because it was so early. There wasn't a whole lot of tooling that had been built up around it. People weren't familiar with it. We made the decision knowing that it might impede adoption of Overture data, but we had a really strong belief that it was a very strong specification, that it solved a major pain point that people had been working with, and that we had a really strong belief that the open source community would come together and rally around that specification because it was a good specification, and develop the tooling, and that would come. And that actually did happen very quickly, to the point where now there's native geospatial support in Apache. So I think that's a really good indicator of, if there's a standard that's out there or a specification that's out there that's a good one that people can rally around, that kind of development can happen very quickly.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that story. So as we go ahead and get started then, I think it's really important that we do a little bit of level setting on terminology. And one of the terms you've all obviously heard quite a bit is open standards. And so I'd like to ask the panelists what they consider makes a truly open standard and what open is considered. Yeah. Scott, do you want
I'm happy to jump in. And I'm a little bit of a holy warrior on this one, so opens in the name of my organization, opens everything. I think there's really two major criteria to have an open standard. The first is that the people that create the standard, it needs to be a community that's open to participate in. If you want to be involved in creating a standard, you should be open to join that community and work. That doesn't mean you just walk off the street and start putting pen to paper. You do have to do a little bit of homework. You have to join an organization. You have to get involved. You're going to have to sign away some intellectual property rights so that you don't hurt yourself or your friends. But it's open to everyone, and the entire process is open and transparent. We want to see, when people work on standards, everyone knows where the work is occurring. Everyone understands what the rules are to complete. Everyone understands they have an opportunity to reject the work if necessary. So the openness and participation is critical. The other end is it must be available to the end users without any kind of prejudice. So anyone should be able to, in my world, download for free the standard. Some organizations do charge for standards, but if they make them openly available, we could argue maybe that's open-ish. I prefer that they be free. I like that a lot. And I mean really free. You don't have to type your email address to download the standard so that we put you on some kind of mailing list. Literally, you go grab it, you do whatever you want with it, and it's permissively licensed. So you can use it exactly as it is, or you can modify it and do your own things. Just tell people that you've done so. And so it's that entirety of ensuring that the contributors are completely free to do work in the open, and that the users can grab it without any kind of prejudice.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, Neil, you look like you have something to add to that.
I agree almost with everything. I want to correct one thing, well, not correct, comment on one thing you said, but I agree with almost everything you said. Open participation, anyone can get involved and get engaged. And to me, the litmus test of whether an open collaborative endeavor is truly open is whether you have genuine multi-organizational governance. So it's no one company or organization has veto, has control, has a special vote. It's a very well-defined democratic process that every voice is heard, and you are typically building genuine consensus. It's the building of consensus that is the open part. You did say one thing, that you have to sign away your intellectual property rights. I have to just make a comment on that. And I know your IP framework and all the IP frameworks out there. You're not signing away your IP framework. You're just licensing your IP for use in conformant standards. Because I have that conversation all the time inside NVIDIA. There's so much misperception about that. You're not giving away your IP.
That's important.
So, and the other interesting thing is open source. People get open source, and there's lots of open source here at the conference, open source and open standards, totally confused, which is surprising because they're both collaborative, but actually diametrically opposite. Open source, of course, is you have multiple companies collaborating on a single implementation of whatever it is, which is great. You can share the load. You can make sure there's consistency because everyone's using the same implementation. An open standard, though, is a specification with conformance tests specifically to enable multiple implementations. So it's kind of funneling the other way. And that makes open standards a super powerful tool to make a technology pervasively available across the broad industry, across all geographies, price points, markets, use cases. You're enabling multiple companies to implement and get that technology out there. The two are very complementary, and both are awesome. And open standards often make use of open source for open source tooling and samples and tooling and implementations, sample implementations. So we need both, but it's important to use the right tool at the right time.
Yeah, that's a good distinction. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I mean, I endorse what my colleagues say. And I think that the structure of a good open source community, an open standard community, is the community that informs it. People who have a passion to move technology forward, who have a clear idea of why they are there, that's a critical one. I'm sure many of us have been involved with standards organizations where people have been tasked to go, or the standards process becomes its own end state. They may be open, they may be influenceable, but how effective they are, I think, can become a question. So the vibrancy of the community and the ideas that are brought in and the real world problems that are then resolved between the members of that community, to me that makes the difference between an effective open community, whether it's open source or open standards, and a less effective one.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot to add here. I think you pretty much covered it. I will add one thing in terms of kind of the getting members of the community involved and the transparency and the development of those standards for them to be open. Sometimes the problem isn't so much that it's not open and everybody can come, but that people don't know about it, or that the engagement is limited simply because there's not the visibility. And so I think if I were to say what makes it open, obviously that anybody can come and participate, but one thing we can probably do better when we think about standards and when we start building these communities around a new standard is to make sure that we are making it easy to engage and not just open to engage.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's actually a really good lead into the next question too. So obviously participation is really important and being open, but what else does it take to make some standards successful and others fail?
Someone else go first.
I can think of several standards that they're great, they're architecturally sound, they're not particularly successful, and typically there's some element of mandate that's come from an agency, an organization that says, thou will have a standard to do this. I think those ones tend to sort of die off. I think the standards that evolve out of a community clearly saying, hey, we have a common set of challenges. We may be competitors, we may have a different problem set, but we share this common group, and it comes together to solve that's what makes it successful. It's about this. It's about the energy and the ideas and the willingness to discuss, the willingness to go around the water cooler and have those intense conversations to say this is the correct approach. That's what makes a difference. That's a successful standard.
Yeah, getting the end user engaged.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. If somebody comes down and says, go make me a standard, it's probably not going to be that successful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with that completely. I think an interesting question, well, what is the definition of success? I think success is wide adoption and usage in the industry, because if a specification, a standard is created and no one uses it, there's really no point. And having been involved in a number of standards, many of them were not successful. you come to a realization that if you can achieve a genuinely pervasively adopted standard, it's quite rare. It's something to be cherished, not for its own right, but nurtured, because if you have a widely adopted standard, it can become a very effective vehicle for moving the industry forward if the community is thoughtful and has energy to push things forward. So luckily, we've developed a simple 6-point program for standardization success. So I'm going to see if I can remember them. So don't worry, it's short. So one is, kind of to the point earlier, you have to be focused on the problem that people care about. If the industry doesn't care about what you're working on, it's not going to get adopted, because why do it? Secondly, I've forgotten it. Oh, I have forgotten it. It's when okay, you've got to have. You start. I'll think of it. Go ahead.
You think, as you said, focus, and that's, I think, a really important part. We cannot have the one standard to rule them all, and a lot of organizations have tried that. And when you make an overly comprehensive, overly ambitious standard, you are biting off more than the implementer will chew, right? You can write that thing, but no one really wants to do it. And that focus, building the standards that solve discrete problems, building standards that are addressed to the end users, are far more valuable than the one that you think intellectually is going to solve it all. It also means that you want your community engaged. And so this week, we're talking a lot about cesium and the 3D tiles community standard in OGC. So there's a case where an organization had developed a specification that was valuable to a lot of users. It's focused, it does some things really, really well, and it doesn't do everything. That's great. And that community was seen as being very valuable, and OGC chose to bring that in as a community standard. That means we endorse as an organization, this is foundational work, it should be part of our baseline. We recognize we don't own it, but we endorse it, and we want to have a stamped version that everyone can share. And I think the value of, again, that focus in solving a discrete problem that everyone can get their head around is really important.
Yeah, having it pointed is important for sure. Neil, did you find your?
Number 2 is, timing. Timing is everything when you're trying to create an open standard. If you try and do it too soon, and what you're trying to standardize is still in debate, it's still being researched, please don't try to do R&D by standards committee, death by 1,000 cuts. We tried that, it doesn't work. And if you're too late, that the fragmentation can already be established, and it can be hard to unpick. The perfect window is when everyone kind of knows what to do, but everyone's doing it in an annoyingly different way, and everyone kind of agrees it would be really great if you could have an open standard. That's the time for standardization to strike. And then number 3 is don't do paper designs. And I think OGC are kind of the leader, actually, in this. I think what you guys do is kind of showing the way forward in have iterative design and specification with implementation. You can stare at a paper spec for months, it all looks perfect, and 5 minutes starting to code, and all the gaps become apparent. You must have good testing, because a specification without testing isn't worth the PDF it's printed on. If it's not tested, it doesn't work, and particularly for format standards like GLTF, if you don't have reliable import and export from the tools, it will fragment before you know it. That's what happened to Collada. All the tools, we didn't have sufficient testing. The tools didn't handle the standard correctly, and it was actually amazing how fast the whole ecosystem just collapsed. And tooling, you've got to have lots of tooling. And once you have a standard, you've got to keep engaged. And again, I think OGC are doing really good stuff. You're putting the specs out on GitHub. We're doing that too now. It's not just a PDF, but it's a GitHub repo that people can come to, engage, file issues on, bugs, and it becomes, again, a community process.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize the experimentation. I mean, I talked about back in the 90s when DIS came along. We went from a half-baked standard that came out of a DARPA program this would have been December 1993. In December 1994 at ITSEC, there were 170 simulators interoperating on the floor. We shared terrain, we shared data, we shared a fact. To pull that off in that time frame, the amount of experimentation that went on that validated the standard that we were building that was the key enabler. That and the entire community was looking at us.
Yeah.
But it was that testing and that proof of what we've defined as an architectural standard that made all the difference. If we hadn't had that, we'd probably still be talking about it.
I think that's the biggest thing, is having, use cases, having implementations that are happening throughout the development process. I think that's the number one thing that I see, in our own task forces and working groups at Overture, is that's where we stall. If we get to a point, we can throw all the engineering solutions at something, all the technical solutions at something, but where we typically stall is when we don't have a good use case for something that we're doing. And if we don't have that, it's very difficult to make progress forward, because you have no way to really test out the things that in theory you think are the right paths forward. And so I think that's a really key thing, and I think that's a way to move standards forward faster as well. They don't have to be well developed, they don't have to be full-fledged implementations, but to keep testing, keep iterating, and bring those kinds of things to the table. It's definitely not paper standards. Those tend to get bloated because all you're doing is putting words on paper, and it's not really focusing on addressing the key issues that the standard itself is supposed to address.
Yeah, getting the feedback too. So I do want to just kind of give the audience a little bit of a heads up. So I did mention that we want to include all of you in the discussions as well. So I do have a question coming up, so not the next one, but I want you to all start thinking, where are the gaps in geospatial standards? So, what are the opportunities that kind of exist that you as the developers are seeing and would like to be addressed? So start thinking about that. But the next question I've got is something that Amy kind of alluded to, is that standard development sometimes gets a bad rap of being slow, maybe a little bit boring. So what are some of the ways that maybe you guys could address that, or does it stifle innovation because you've got to work to get consensus from so many different key stakeholders and competitors? And so I'd love to hear thoughts on how you would talk about that.
Yeah, it's it can be frustratingly slow sometimes, but I think also when I think about standards and standard development, thinking about ways to speed that up, I always go back to the idea of desire paths, and people that are familiar with that in like urban planning, where you've had a lot of different universities implement this, where they build the sidewalks after people have paved the trail through the grass, and see, well, what was the most efficient way for people to get from building to building? That's where we need to put the sidewalk. And I always think about that in terms of the way that we develop, pretty much anything, software, standards, data, is having that agile way of seeing what works, what's the most efficient, or the way that people behave in reality, and then develop in that way. And I think that's one way that, again, building on that idea of use cases and implementations to drive the standard, I think that's something that we need to do more of, and not do it in a way that again, is kind of forced, but to play it out naturally and let those desire paths, or the way that we actually need to implement a standard, drive our decision making there.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
Yeah, I think the answer's on the tin here. It's pragmatic approach. I can certainly think of some international standards groups that I've been involved with over my career, where some of the conversations became almost theological about the correct approach. And that sucked the life out of the room, pulled the life out of the organization, bogged everything down. And if I think now about some of the particular standards in the command and control community that I was involved with, we don't use them. They're out there, they're on bookshelves, you could use them, but they have no vibrancy and no life because they just were not a pragmatic approach. And I think that's where it slows down. If you keep pragmatic, you keep energized, and you keep proving to yourselves and your community that the work you're doing is solving real problems, it's going to keep rolling, and it should not stand in the way of innovation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think standards do have that reputation, but I think it's actually, it's not justified because I think people are comparing it to how fast a single company can come up with a draft spec. They don't have to convince anyone, they don't have to talk to anyone, they can just pump out the document. Obviously that's faster. I think though they're trying to achieve a different thing. What a good standardization process is trying to achieve is to build the consensus to create a specification that can be adopted and implemented throughout the industry. And of course it takes time to do that, but that's not a bug, that's the feature. That is the whole core value of the standardization process, is you're bringing together the stakeholders that care, and you're building the consensus to get the pervasive technology out there into the industry. And other things that standards can do, though, to kind of keep velocity moving forward, well-designed standards from many different standards organizations are extensible. GLTF is a good example. So any vendor can extend these standards without needing permission or talking to anyone. And so you kind of get a bow wave effect where people are trying out new stuff and the Darwinian mechanics kick in and the successful ones can get adopted back into the spec. That can actually be a pretty good way to keep the momentum moving forward. I think the other bad rap is that standards are stifling innovation, but that I think is unjustified too, because you're enabling the industry to network and leverage all the effort around you. You don't have to invent and develop everything yourself. It enables companies to focus on their core competencies, and that lets the industry move forward faster, not slower, because of standards.
Yeah, innovation doesn't happen within walled gardens, right? Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things we've done at OGC to make sure these things do move faster is really rework our entire process. So if you whip out a standard in 2 weeks, you didn't really think through the problem. And that's just not realistic. But the deliberation, that decision-making time to try to make sure you're doing the right thing is often the slow part in a standard. People work, come up with ideas, and deliberate and discuss. And when that's all in your head, that can be a little slow. So we do a lot of code sprints now. And the vast majority of our standards are actually really developed in a code sprint. You put the developers, the writers, and some data modelers all in a room for 3 days together to work on 3 or 4 standards. And they're going to work through all the proof, all the evidence you need that the concepts in the standard are probably implementable and usable. They're not necessarily going to solve every problem, but when you get to that deliberation part, instead of spending 6 weeks talking about whether that should be a null value or not, you've already tried it out in an experiment, and you're sort of done, and the decision gets made fast. And so that does one thing, is that it moves the process a little faster. But it's had a really good unintended consequence, and it's that Goldilocks paradox of where a standard fits in that continuum from being stifling of innovation to being just out there in the Wild West. And we want to have that just right balance. You make a standard too specific, then interoperability amongst your data is great, but you give the industry no opportunity to compete based on that standard because it's just super specified. If we go the other way and go a completely free and easy standard with a single requirement, yeah, you're not going to get much interoperability, but your industry can compete and it's just not going to go anywhere. And when we do that in these sprints, one of the nice things is those same industry competitors can sit in the room and find that balance of these are the things we're all willing to compromise on, get as common, that we can build our own differentiating capabilities on top of. And here's some things that are off limits. Don't put this little thing in the standard because that's a place where one person thinks it's tough for competition. And I think it self-corrects quite nicely.
I think that's an excellent point. I think the right level of abstraction, right? Because I think a good, well-designed standard is actually designed to foster competition, but at the right level. A competition that moves the industry forward, not competition that holds the industry back. So typically you want to find, I like the term, the Goldilocks level of abstraction, where you're defining the operation of this technology, but you're not defining you're defining how the technology is used, not how it's implemented. So you give the freedom for multiple companies and organizations to implement underneath that specification, and they compete in a healthy way to add value with their own core expertise, but in a way that doesn't fragment the industry. That actually, again, accelerates innovation, not holds it back.
I agree, yeah.
Yeah.
Really does help.
You had another good point that I don't want to miss, which is the importance of getting people together for a dedicated space of time, 2 days, 3 days, whatever it is. Because what can happen when you have, even if it's one meeting every week, there's a big loss of knowledge and remembering, hey, what did we talk about last week? And you tend to repeat things over and over. Some chunk of that gets repeated. And when you get everybody together that needs to be in on that decision making or reaching consensus, you can do it so much faster by dedicating time. And I know everybody's schedules are very busy, and to set aside, I've got to set aside 2 days or a 3-day block of time to do this, but you make such faster progress when you're able to do that and move things forward in a much more efficient way than to kind of have this cadence that has this, it's a lossy process when you drag it out.
Yep. Did you have something else to add, David?
Yeah, it occurred to me as I was listening to the conversation. I think the other thing that the communities have to do is self-reflect. If I think about the live training community, the laser engagement systems that are typically used, there's now 2 standards, one of which really should have faded away and disappeared a while ago, and a more innovative standard that is allowing innovation. And that's splitting the industry. Interoperability is a massive issue in those domains at the moment. And part of the problem is that the community, which had the admittedly older standard, has never stepped back and said, you know what? We might need to go to version 2. What's that going to look like? Because they're very invested in what they've done, and I get it. And there's decades of work. But it's just not fit for purpose right now.
Yeah.
And it's really disrupting that industry.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really true point. That is a guilt we all share in the standards world, I think, is although there are days I feel this way, we generally don't want to kill our own children. But some of these standards, we've got an attachment to, there's a community that loves them and wants to build around them, but it is a dead end. It is a technological dead end, or it's literally just no longer addressing a problem that we need to solve with standards. But it is so hard, and I trust we try hard, but there's always somebody who doesn't want it to die.
And it is hard, right? Because you have a tail end of the community. You don't want to abandon them.
No.
So you have to get the balance.
Yeah. You have to balance what the members want too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it can't just be the board deciding that you need to have the input from all the membership.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about the audience? Is there anything that you would like to see change in the industry that we've been discussing here that would help alleviate some of those issues with slow times and innovation? Anybody? Yep, go ahead, right over here. Oh, she's bringing you a mic.
Hello. Something that I'd like to see, especially with text-based standards like KML, are code generators. And something that I've been playing with recently using something called Google Flat Buffers. They have something called the Flat C compiler, and you have a standard in an interface description language document that's language agnostic, and it'll generate source code in any language you want. Tools like that help with technical debt and take the burden off of those developers to spend all that overhead, for management, spend all that capital, transitioning to a new standard. So, if we had, I guess, more industry support and more industry funding for code generators, I think that would be beneficial.
Yeah.
I think that's an excellent point. And all of us in the standards community, I mean, Khronos is fantastic about this, about offering developer tools and developer resources. The more we can do of that to make things more easily implementable, the more examples we can provide, including if our commercial partners who work in the standard are willing to make a little bit of their source code for free as well. It can only help with adoption. And it's actually probably more fun to put that stuff together and then write a standard anyhow. It's just that it's not sort of been the job description for a long time.
Something that's kind of I like your point, that something that's adjacent is the use of AI, vibe coding. We've had some interesting examples. We People are vibe coding using a well-established API like Vulkan. It's flawless. And you begin to think, well, we put a lot of effort into documentation and samples. Wouldn't it be better just to make sure the AIs are trained, that you can just vibe code it? That maybe is the way forward, certainly getting that balance right. But even during the spec development process, we're beginning to find we're doing vibe coding of example code early in the spec development process. We find where the AI gets confused and doesn't produce an operable program. It's because the spec is vague or wrong. And we're actually beginning to say, oh, wow, we can actually, not just our end users using AI, we should be using AI during the spec generation process. It's all happening over the last few weeks. And it's moving fast, obviously. But I think it will change everything.
Yeah, that is. Absolutely. All right, right over here.
Hi, my name is Sam Rabani from Classic Viron in the UK. Just seeing what you guys have been doing, it's very commendable. Just got a two-part question. How can we better engage non-technical users like educators and students from tech-resistant backgrounds to not only enter the geospatial field, but also feel more empowered to use these tools in everyday teaching and learning? And what approaches or resources have you found most effective in making these technologies feel more approachable and relevant across multiple disciplines?
Can I take first run at that? So I had exactly that problem with my 17-year-old. And I turned him loose on gaming. And he went from being a typical, I guess, late 16-year-old, and he's now on his way to study cybersecurity at university. And he put the work in, but that seed that was planted was in the gaming world and working in geospatial environments in whatever games he was playing. The tools and the connection between the geospatial environments and the gaming, and then what we do in this sort of industrial heavy simulation, that is such an easy path if we structure it within the educational system. I'm just completely convinced of this. 10 years ago, I wouldn't have cared, but you have a teenager trying to get out the door and off the payroll. Yeah. These things become important, and watching that kid just get fired up was spectacular. And it was all because he could create a world, create worlds, control those worlds, and now he's going to go off and do it for a living. That to me is the key.
It's such an important question. I mean, it's an opportunity both for the students and for the industry, to get people engaged and provide them with opportunity. The industry should do more. There's actually a non-profit here in Philadelphia. Patrick is closely involved with it. Create Access. They have a table actually running programs with the local educators to bring kids into the world of 3D. And you can see the engagement of the kids as they come into the programs and actually learn and realize that this world is accessible to them. So anyone in the industry, we should be investing more in that call to action, everyone.
Yeah, and I think from a standards group perspective, a lot of the different standards groups will have academic level membership, and that's usually a pretty low cost membership for universities to join and actually start participating in the standards development organizations. So I know from like a Khronos perspective, it would be really awesome if we could, help train the trainers of getting more educators out there to actually get students excited about and educated on how to use our standards. And
we've actually found it hard, right?
Yeah, it's been very hard.
Because at least in our situation, I'm sure everyone's different, but
yeah.
We're standards and technology people. We're not educators. We really don't understand how, really, at a gut level, how to do it. So if any educators there, or people that have experience in education and can help the standards organizations be a good on-ramp, I think most standards organizations would be glad of the help.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a great way to help spread, and get more adoption too of longer term engagement and excitement for your standards. So.
Yeah, and I think we can demystify the whole environment a little bit. Just bring students to our events and meetings. So OGC holds 3 meetings a year somewhere in the world. We always want as many students as possible to come attend. And they're not going to understand the uber nerdiness that we live in all day, every day. But just sort of the osmosis and the hallway conversations and such, they pick up a lot. And in the same way, so I took my 17-year-old son to Unreal Fest a couple years ago, and he met Alban, he met Patrick and a few others. He didn't understand how to do all that stuff in Unreal, but I tell you, by the time he got home, he was willing to learn it all because he was so captivated by what he saw at the event. And so if we can just bring them into our fold, we don't have to necessarily try to talk down to these students. We just have to let them experience. And I think they do pretty well. They're smarter than I am.
Yeah. Oh, yep, go ahead. Oh, she's.
Hi, I'm Vicky. I'm also from Class of Your Own in the UK. So just following on from what Sam said, we are a non-profit organisation. We teach children from years 11 up to 18, and they are coming through in the built environment using Cesium, using MicroStation, Revit. So it'd be great to have a chat afterwards, actually, about education and how we're working with this. Thank you.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Yeah, we'd love to get more participation. It's interesting sometimes too, from, again, looking at from a Khronos or Metaverse Standards, you have a lot of competitors coming in to these working groups to develop their standards. And so these companies want to send their senior level folks to represent them in the working groups. And so a lot of times the younger developers don't get a lot of experience in actually participating in the standards development organizations. And so you see a lot of the same faces over and over again. And I think that there is a really big opportunity for younger developers to get involved and actually help with the process, because I think that's part of what helps keep us agile and able to not get so slow and boring, right, is when we have the younger audience. Yep. Is there another question?
Yeah. Hello, my name is Dave Schwartz. I'm the director for the School of Interactive Games and Media. I've been at several different conferences over the years. We had actually started a few years back. I think we were the first game department to embed a GIS division, my pal Brian Tapachevsky. So we're actually in the midst of, I don't know, there's a curse word in here, trying to figure this out. So one of my frustrations with the Standards Group, Khronos, I've been at SIGGRAPH, we've talked about this. Let's get a triangle on the screen in Vulkan. Which tutorial do you go through? I'm actually talking to the Omniverse team, similar things. Say, oh, well, go look at the developers forum. I feel like Unreal, Unity, and some of the others have really nailed this. I'll just join a standards committee. All our budgets are cut. It's actually a big fight just to get a few $1,000s for anything.
Yeah.
Just bring your students along, thousands of dollars. I'm not saying I'm hoping for money falling from the skies, but essentially the industries or the standards committees talking to the industries to say, work with the academic partners to say, if you want this in the classrooms, it takes time developing those examples. And right now, your typical student goes on YouTube and God only knows what they're looking at. And they're okay, they tend to be pretty good. But if those were vetted, checked, would be really amazing. So I've tried to do this myself. And at RIT, we are actually working on this at the worlds of games and GIS, games and Cesium and so forth. So we are making some headway, but we're just sort of finding our own path through this.
Yeah, would love to talk to you afterwards. I mean, the Vulkan Working Group at Khronos is putting fairly significant effort into creating a curated set of samples. It's never enough, but we'd love to get your feedback. And also really beginning to try to guide the industry, because if you just use the modern subset of Vulkan, it's actually much easier than if you use all the 1.0 stuff. So we need to do better at signposting that as well. But again, we'd love to talk to you about that.
We would love to get more feedback. We provide a lot of free educational material to universities, to teaching organizations of all kinds. We often don't get feedback about how effective they were. And so if it's written by me, I am not going to understand perhaps what the student is going to see. And what I think is important, the student may not really care about the coordinate reference system issues that I think are just super cool. And so how we can get more feedback and have a bit more critique of our materials, we'd be happy to update them all.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to go back to my question for the audience. Where do you see there's gaps in geospatial standards that you would like to be addressed? Does anybody come up with a thought or any gaps? Okay.
Hey, I'm Kurt from Bohemia Simulations. So this is sort of a gap in that as fidelity continues to increase, we see more visually accurate roads, buildings, but a lot of these are coming from derivations from the actual OGC standards. Land infra, I'm trying to remember the last time it was updated, maybe like 2016. Yeah. So OSM continues to move forward, but then on top of that, we have things like Open Drive. A lot of these are providing really, accurate, updated visualizations of roads, other pieces of transportation. It feels like things are moving forward faster than open standards can keep up. Is there, how do you see open standards trying to keep up with the, innovation moving forward, especially now that AI is going to really push innovation speed that much further ahead?
I mean, I want to speak specifically to the example used with Open Drive, for instance. So Open Drive does really amazing stuff with simulation and for vehicle activity simulations and such. And the Open Drive community's approached us recently about using a subset of the OGC City GML standard, an urban modeling standard, to enhance the visual fidelity of Open Drive data without ruining what makes Open Drive so special. And it's those collaborations. If we can work more with these other organizations and pick and choose the best bits of all of our solutions and find a way to bolt them together, I think we can be far more reactive. The problem is that we're getting better at this in OGC, but not perfect, need to also be far better at modularizing our work so we can pick out a few things and insert someone else's, and accept that just because we didn't invent it doesn't mean it's great, right? So there's a little bit of the ego in there as well. But it's the collaboration in all these activities are really the only way we're going to move at a much faster rate.
Thank you.
I'm, like we were saying earlier, I'm becoming increasingly convinced that AI is, we need to accelerate the standardization process using AI as well as enabling AI. I mean, AI is going to revolutionize everything in geospatial. We can do semantic understanding from sensor data scalably. We can make more content, which has been a bottleneck for 3D graphics for 40 years. That bottleneck's about to be broken. And even the way we transport 3D is about to be changed. Neural compression, neural materials. It's all going to change. The standards, I agree with you, with the standardization process needs to speed up. We need to use technology that's enabling everyone else to move faster. We need to move faster as well.
So I guess now I'll ask the panelists, do you see, is there another question or another?
Just to address your where there are gaps. A lot of work seems to go into things like geometry standards and so forth. And one of the areas for me, also from RIT, coming more from the remote sensing perspective, is we spend a lot of time talking about color, RGB color, human visualization. And I come from a field where we care about all the wavelengths that we don't see. And I would really love to see a lot more development being put into how we actually describe photorealistic materials that work at all wavelengths, because all these wavelengths are highly uncorrelated with each other. So many of our material representations are things like 3- and 4-band images that help us modulate colors only where we can see them. And once we start to think about what things look like in the shortwave infrared and the longwave infrared and stuff like that, they're so highly uncorrelated. People are like, well, we have noise models. And it's like, well, you don't just need variances in those noise models, you need those spectral covariances in those things. And that's a huge amount of dimensionality. We've been recently playing with things like, to go to the NVIDIA Omniverse world, the material description language, where the specification for color is an arbitrary number of wavelengths, but all the reference implementations are just RGB. So in terms of gaps and where I'd love to see somehow standards committees and organizations encourage things, it's to say, we made a standard, but here's more than just like the little basic part of the standard or a basic reference implementation. We need bigger implementations sometimes to actually make sure that we don't get locked in step to, this is MDL, and everybody's version of MDL is only RGB, when there's a whole bunch of us that would like to actually be able to model hundreds, if not thousands, of wavelengths at the same time. So any comments on those types of things I think would be at least interesting to one of us.
I think it's a really interesting topic. We have, in the spatial community, we're really good at talking about the spatial accuracy of something, how, where it is and within some circular, how far it could be from that spot. But we don't talk much about the, quote, spectral accuracy. What's my blue to your blue? Two different sensors have two different blues. And so there was actually a proposal that came to OGC a few years ago from the National Reconnaissance Office and a few of the satellite providers to try to start to get a nomenclature around bandwidth descriptors that can to start to talk about, quote, accuracy, as in what does the signature look like, how broad is that spectral signature, and try to have at least a common way to phrase it. Even if we don't know what's important, if we can put it in the same language all the time, we're halfway there. And there's a data quality register in work right now with ISO Technical Committee 211 and OGC's cooperation. And it's one of the things we want to get into, that is not just CE90 positional accuracy, but all these other things that people care about. Spectral accuracy, the nature of correction between the different level products from remote sense imagery based on atmospheric correction and all that stuff. How do we start to come up with nomenclature? The scientists already have good nomenclature, but it's never been put into a good register for us. So I'd love to talk more about that as some future work.
That's one thing to add. I mean, and it's not meant to be a flippant statement, but the standards organizations will respond if they get requirements. It's surprisingly difficult, in my experience, for requirements to come from the user community into the standardization process. So if you are a developer and you have awesome requirements like that, don't be shy. Come and yell at them politely. Make your views known. Because if more people start asking, something will happen. I mean, it's just straightforward. So I encourage you to be vocal.
And I think that that's a good point is, we've talked a lot about participation and the need to get end user feedback and developer feedback. How can our audience actually participate in your groups and provide that feedback? Like, what do they need to do? Do they have to join, or is there another way?
Well, I was on that track, so let me finish the thought. So, yes, it's really important. And most of the standards organizations, we do try, not perfectly, again, but we do try to have multiple ways to engage, from online forums. GitHub increasingly is a tool for collaboration, which are obviously free and open to everyone. If you want to get more engaged, there are typically multiple levels of membership engagement that start often at $0. And you can come in and get your requirements into the working groups directly and reach out to your favorite standards organization to see what options are. And of course, the lifeblood of every standards organization is when people actually join and fully engage with the standardization process. But we realize that not everyone has the time to do that. So I think all of the standards organizations try to reach out, find out what the options are, and please help us do a better job at meeting your needs and requirements.
Go on.
Yeah, I think I'm reflecting on that, and I agree. But having been a senior business manager, when you have a large team, you have a lot of people saying, "Hey, I want to go do this. I want to go do that. I want to go do the other." I think one of the things that we do a disservice, and I certainly did when I was earlier in my career, is think about the business case for your organization. What is your rationale? I know you want to do it. It's an important thing to you. How is it important to your organization? Join that dot. So your management chain, whoever you report to, whoever is writing the checks, is going to say, you know what, this is going to make a difference for this organization. Doesn't matter if it's commercial, government, or academic. tell that story and tell it well, and you'll get the endorsement, which will allow you to engage, which will allow you to make progress, and allow you to bring these interesting issues to the groups. It's very interesting in my experience how often people make that business case poorly, and at the end of the day, we're making business decisions.
Yeah, I would say articulating that value proposition is important for that reason, and also a big reason why standards can fail or succeed. If that value proposition is not articulated, then nobody's going to get it. No matter if there's 1 or 10 people that think it's important, you need to have broader adoption, and that's a key to that.
Yep.
Yeah, come to the OGC code sprints. They're open to anybody. You can bring your requirements with you, and you can work against those requirements. Typically, we might have 60, 80 people in a room and 150 online in any one of our code sprints. Everyone's welcome. Every code sprint includes mentor tracks, so you can be brought up to speed if you don't know anything about what we're talking about. You'll learn it in a few hours and then can participate fully. And stay tuned tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. for one of the keynotes that will tell you more about how to get involved as well, but I'm not going to give that news.
And we're just running out of time now. Maybe if you could put the slide up. There's additional topics that are coming up to keep this conversation going. So I definitely encourage you to not only go to that opening session tomorrow, but also Khronos Group will have a GLTF Ecosystem Forum meeting. It's going to be here at 9:40, and so that's another great opportunity to provide some feedback. Amy has got another presentation tomorrow as well about Overture Maps Foundation, and there's some exciting capture stories that are there. And then I also put on the slide, if you're interested in getting involved in any of the standards group that we discussed, that there's some good links there as well. So thank you all. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you, Patrick and the CCM team. So it's been fun.